Night one of the second Democratic debate, hosted by CNN, featured Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren facing off against Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke, Amy Klobuchar, John Delaney, John Hickenlooper, Tim Ryan, Marianne Williamson, and Steve Bullock. Needless to say, there was no shortage of memorable moments.
I think if we're going to force Americans to make these radical changes, they're not going to go along. You throw your hands up, but you haven't. Oh, I can do it.
I believe Senator Sanders, please let Senator Warren respond.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I don't understand why anybody goes to all the trouble of running for president of the United States just to talk about what we really can't do and shouldn't fight for.
What makes me qualified? If you did the math of the 40 acres and a mule, given that there was 4 to 5 million slaves at the end of the Civil War.
It will finally include dental care, hearing aids, and eyeglasses.
You don't know that,
Second
Bernie.
of all,
We'll come to you in a second,
I do know, and I wrote the damn bill.
In this video, I'm going to highlight the most heated exchanges, best and worst arguments, and attempt to answer the question, who won? Okay, so in the interest of transparency, to start out with, I want to refer back to my predictions video about this debate. I think I got the majority of my predictions correct, but I also made some crucial miscalculations. So here are the predictions that I think I got right. The debate had a strong issues and policy focus. We got some of the strongest performances out of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Pete Buttigieg. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren did not attack each other. In fact, they pretty much teamed up. Beto O'Rourke and Pete Buttigieg remained fairly passive. They didn't lay on any major attacks. Delaney, Hickenlooper, and Ryan attacked Bernie aggressively, which allowed Bernie to be more aggressive than we typically see from him. Klobuchar also attacked Bernie, but more indirectly. Okay, so I think I got all that right, but there were at least two major dynamics that I definitely got wrong. I had predicted that minor centrist candidates would focus their attacks on Bernie, leaving Warren to have to make moments from attacking Buttigieg and or Beto. In fact, they went after her and Bernie simultaneously, and her inclusion in those attacks created a dynamic where it was basically a progressive frontrunner tag team against the minor centrists. I also predicted that we wouldn't see anything particularly powerful from Marianne Williamson. She would just give us some moments of comic relief. On that, I was definitely wrong. Nothing could have been further from the truth.
An amoral economic system has turned short-term profits for huge multinational corporations into a false god. And this new false god takes precedence over the safety and the health and the well-being of we, the American people, and the people of the world, and the planet on which we live. But for politicians, including my fellow candidates, who themselves have taken tens of thousands and in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars from these same corporate donors, to think that they now have the moral authority to say, we're going to take them on, I don't think the Democratic Party should be surprised that so many Americans believe yada, yada, yada. And I've heard some people here tonight, I almost wonder why you're Democrats. You seem to think there's something wrong about using the instruments of government to help people. That is what government should do.
Marianne had a powerful performance throughout much of the night and was the most Googled candidate in the pack. She was particularly strong around issues surrounding race. She had a fantastic response to Don Lemon, who asked her about her reparations plan.
You are calling for up to $500 billion in financial assistance. What makes you qualified to determine how much is owed in reparations?
Well, first of all, it's not $500 billion in financial assistance. It's payment of a debt that is owed. That is what reparations is. What makes me qualified? If you did the math of the 40 acres and a mule, given that there was 4 to 5 million slaves at the end of the Civil War, today it would be trillions of dollars. And I believe that anything less than $100 billion is an insult. And I believe that 200 to 500 billion is politically feasible today.
She received even more applause connecting issues of environment and race, and speaking about Flint.
We have communities, particularly communities of color and disadvantaged communities all over this country, who are suffering from environmental injustice. I assure you, I lived in Grosse Pointe. What happened in Flint would not have happened in Grosse Pointe. This is part of the dark underbelly of American society. It's particularly people of color, it's particularly people who do not have the money to fight back. And if the Democrats don't start saying it, then why would those people feel that they're there for us? And if those people don't feel it, they won't vote for us, and Donald Trump will win.
In my book, Williamson was one of the clear winners of this debate. An incredible comeback after her disappointing performance in debate 1. Still, her performance was not flawless. While Williamson has defined herself as one of the progressives in the race, she distanced herself from Warren and Sanders on one of the most important issues, healthcare, using an argument that seemed to advocate for weakness and capitulation.
I'm normally way over there with Bernie and Elizabeth on this one. I hear the others, and I do have concern about what the Republicans would say. I do have concern that it will be difficult. I have concern that it will make it harder to win, and I have concern that it will make it harder to govern.
That allowed, of all people, Pete Buttigieg to attack her from the left.
It is time to stop worrying about what the Republicans will say. Look, yes. if it's true that if we embrace a far-left agenda, they're going to say we're a bunch of crazy socialists. If we embrace a conservative agenda, you know what they're going to do? They're going to say we're a bunch of crazy socialists. So let's just stand up for the right policy, go out there and defend it.
Despite advocating a centrist position of Medicare for all who want it, this was not Pete's only line of defense for the progressive position on healthcare. He also pushed back against the moderators and other centrists, explaining that,
look, this is a distinction without a difference whether you're paying the same money in the form of taxes or premiums.
Let's be clear, that admission cedes ground to the supporters of the damn bill that Sanders wrote, and Pete is smart enough to know that. So I think we should consider this a demonstration of integrity from a candidate that, full disclosure, I don't support ideologically. Pete's performance also included a clearly well-rehearsed response to issues that got him into trouble the last time, racial injustice, where he listed specific accomplishments and plans he supports on a national level. That may have surprised some people, but far less surprising was the host of strong sound bites he delivered throughout the debate.
Ask yourself how somebody like Donald Trump ever gets within cheating distance of the Oval Office in the first place. It doesn't happen unless America is already in a crisis. And we could talk about these policies, but we already know the policies. The only thing I could think of looking into the eyes of this child is we're supposed to be dealing with this so you don't have to. High school is hard enough without having to worry about whether you're going to get shot. We have now produced the second school shooting generation in this country. We dare not allow there to be a third. Does anybody really think we're going to overtake Citizens United without constitutional action? This is a country that once changed its constitution so you couldn't drink, and then change it back because we changed our minds about that. Thank you. Nominate me, and you get to see the President of the United States stand next to an American war veteran and explain why he chose to pretend to be disabled when it was his chance to serve. We're pretty close to the day when we will wake up to the news of a casualty in Afghanistan who was not born on 9/11. And if you are watching this at home, and you are a Republican member of Congress, consider the fact that when the sun sets on your career and they are writing your story of all the good and bad things you did in your life, the thing you will be remembered for is whether in this moment with this president you found the courage to stand up to him or you continue to put party over country.
Without question, Pete had a solid performance with no clear fumbles. The night was a win for the mayor of South Bend. The success of Pete Buttigieg is in itself bad news for his closest competitor in the polls, Beto O'Rourke. Beto's performance in the debate was an improvement over his rather nervous and awkward appearance in debate 1, but this was probably too little too late. For the most part, we got the Beto we know, which might be good news for his fans, but is unlikely to endear him to those who don't already love him.
In the face of cruelty and fear from a lawless president, we will choose to be the nation that stands up for the human rights of everyone, for the rule of law for everyone, and a democracy that serves everyone. At this moment of truth, let us pursue our national promise and make a more perfect union of everyone, by everyone, and for everyone.
In this time of moments filled with questions, let us raise our hands and our voices, using words and syllables and letters to offer solutions by the people, for the people, of the people, on the people, with the people. Not my thing. It sounds like a filibuster to me, but I know there are folks out there who like it. On the issue of electability, Beto highlighted the fact that he is from Texas and presented this as a winnable state for Democrats.
Bernie was talking about some of the battleground states in which we compete. There's a new battleground state, Texas, and it has 38 electoral college votes. And the way that we put it in play was by going to each one of those 254 counties. No matter how red or rural, we did not write you off. No matter how blue or urban, we did not take you for granted.
Okay, there's a couple of problems with Beto's case here. First, while Democrats have been salivating about the changing demographics of Texas for years now, the last Democratic presidential candidate to secure the state was Jimmy Carter back in 1976. In the same election, California went to Gerald Ford. By all probability, the state will be harder to flip than the Rust Belt states that flipped from Obama to Trump. The other problem for Beto is that if someone's going to flip Texas, it's not likely to be him. According to RCP, the only Democrat that is currently beating Trump in the Texas polls is Joe Biden, up now by a tiny margin of 2.5%. Beto may be from the state, but polls have Trump beating him by the average margin of 1.5%. Beyond the polls, the history speaks volumes. Not only did Beto fail to beat Ted Cruz in his Senate seat for Texas, although by very narrow margins, but Donald Trump's support for Cruz was widely considered to be one of the reasons why Cruz kept that seat. So if Texas picked a Trump-backed Cruz for the Senate over Beto, why would we expect Texas to flip for Beto now? Obviously, most Democratic voters won't hear my articulation of these facts, but I find it doubtful that they'll buy his reasoning that he can deliver Texas when he failed to do so in his last attempt. But for everyone who was watching, they did get a chance to see Beto get a serious licking from possibly the least recognizable face on the debate stage.
You just said you're offering a false choice, sir.
Congressman, not at all. You know, it took us decades and false starts to get the Affordable Care Act. So let's actually build on it. A public option.
Now, it's not so much what Steve Bullock was saying to Beto as much as the body language Beto presents when he's getting attacked. He kind of looks like a teenager getting chewed out by the vice principal. He looks weak, and that's the last quality you want to project when you're running for president. But just because he was able to make Beto look weak does not mean that the night was a real win for Bullock. The most mysterious candidate in the debate began the night with talk that did little to introduce himself effectively to the American people.
Look, I'm a pro-choice, pro-union, populist Democrat that won 3 elections in a red state.
Just about every Democrat in the country is pro-choice and claims to be pro-union, and winning elections in a red state may speak to electability, but it doesn't say much about his ideology. He might as well have said, I'm a pro-suffrage, abolitionist politician who's going to keep on politicianing all the way to the White House. But the innocuousness was also matched by absurd contradiction.
That farmer getting hit right now by Trump's trade wars, that teacher working a second job just to afford her insulin, they can't wait for a revolution.
They can't wait for a revolution was clearly meant as a dig at Bernie Sanders, but it's an internally illogical claim. A political revolution, if nothing else, means rapid, dramatic change, a contrast to incrementalism, which supports gradual change. Eventually, Bullock did reveal himself, however, making a traditional centrist argument against single-payer healthcare.
At the end of the day, I'm not going to support any plan that rips away quality health care from individuals. This is an example of wish list economics. It used to be just Republicans who wanted to repeal and replace. Now many Democrats do as well. We can get there with a public option, negotiating drug prices, ending.
While lumping in Medicare for all with Republican repeal and replace strategies may or may not be an effective line of argument, I should note that this opening suggestion there that Medicare for all rips away quality healthcare for individuals is, I think, obviously not true. Bernie Sanders' plan would bar most private insurance plans, but it would also replace them with a government-provided plan that would, in most cases, provide more coverage. A private insurance market for healthcare services not covered by Medicare for all would also still exist. So the idea that the plan would rip away quality healthcare is false. Despite twice mentioning that he dedicated his whole career to fighting big money in politics,
Washington, D.C. is captured by dark money, the Koch brothers, and others. That's been the fight of my career. And that's because of the corrupting influence of money. That has been the fight of my career.
Despite big money in politics being the fight of his career, Bullock spent most of the night joining Delaney, Hickenlooper, and Ryan in attacking Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. He sparred with Warren over immigration law.
A sane immigration system needs a sane leader. And we can do that without decriminalizing, providing health care for everyone.
What you're saying is ignore the law. Laws matter. And it matters if we say our law is that we will lock people up who come here seeking refuge, who come here seeking asylum. That is not a crime.
Bullock also suggested that Bernie Sanders sounds anti-worker when he criticizes the fossil fuel industry.
I think Democrats often, when they're saying, oh, these fossil fuel industries, these workers, those coal miner workers, but I think Democrats often sound like the people that, as Congressman Ryan would say, shower at the end of the day, that they're part of the problem.
Steve, there ain't nobody in the Congress who's more strongly pro-worker than I am. So when I talk about taking on the fossil fuel industry, what I am also talking about is a just transition. We can create millions of good paying jobs. We can rebuild communities in rural America that have been devastated. So we are not anti-worker.
Now, I was surprised to see CNN challenge Warren on her policy against a nuclear first strike.
Senator Warren, you want to make it U.S. policy that the U.S. will never use a nuclear weapon unless another country uses one first. Why should the U.S. tie its own hands with that policy?
Because it makes the world safer.
I was even more surprised to see that Bullock disagreed.
I wouldn't want to take that off the table. I think America's strength, we have to be able to say that.
Look at Warren's face reacting to him saying that. Now, I'm probably biased against Bullock in this exchange, as I consider the idea of a nuclear first strike to be as obscene and disgusting as American policy gets. Still, I think Warren won this exchange with this.
We don't expand trust around the world by saying, we might be the first ones to use a nuclear weapon. That puts the entire world at risk and puts us at risk.
Honestly, if anything, I think Warren is being mild in her response here. So allow me to be clear with my own perspective. Threatening the preemptive use of nukes is not just destabilizing and unsafe, it's villainous and evil. But my views aside, I think Bullock's debate performance was relatively middling and unremarkable. As a very low polling candidate, he needed to make his mark. So I think his relatively forgettable performance should count as a loss. Speaking of not making a mark, let's talk about Amy Klobuchar. Throughout the night, she peppered in a number of well-meaning but essentially meaningless platitudes.
Tonight we debate, but ultimately we have to beat Donald Trump. My background, it's a little different than his. I believe that immigrants don't diminish America, they are America.
As I had predicted, she also went after Bernie Sanders in a non-confrontational, passive-aggressive manner.
You're going to hear a lot of promises up here, but I'm going to tell you this. Yes, I have bold ideas, but they are grounded in reality.
Even when asked by Jake Tapper to name names, Klobuchar refused to take on her progressive opponents directly. Watch her not only dodge Tapper's question, but also watch the reaction from Bernie and Warren.
When asked about your primary opponents, quote, a lot of people are making promises and I'm not going to make promises just to get elected. Who on this stage is making promises just to get elected?
Everyone wants to get elected, but my point is this. I think when we have a guy in the White House that is now told...
Yeah, you see that look? That means, yup, she's scared of us. The only person she didn't seem scared of attacking was Donald Trump. Here was probably her strongest moment from the debate.
And I watched and wrote down when 9 times he said he wanted universal background checks. The next day he goes and he meets with the NRA and he folds. As your president, I will not fold.
That's all well and good, but that's not a strong enough moment to give her any movement in the polls. Klobuchar may well be able to skate by into the next debate, but her performance isn't going to move her any close to center stage. Of course, there's worse than not standing out when you're a mid-level contender, and that's standing out for the worst possible reasons when you're a third-tier candidate, which brings us to Tim Ryan.
America is great.
Okay, there was eventually a follow-up to that, but that was a long, awkward pause, and we're just getting warmed up. He also made some downright foolish claims, like this one.
I love Amy Klobuchar, but I think she's wrong on this one. I don't think presidents of the United States meet with dictators.
He was talking about Kim Jong-un there, so perhaps he meant the president shouldn't meet with our enemies? I still think that's wrong since, as has been said, we don't make peace with our friends, we make peace with our enemies. So I don't personally think the idea of never meeting with enemies is a good policy, but I'm sure a lot of people disagree with that sentiment. Still, that's not what Tim Ryan said. He said that we don't meet with dictators, and that's obviously wrong for the simple fact that America has plenty of allies and trading partners run by dictators. Saudi Arabia, for example, is run by an unelected monarchy. Now, China's president is president for life. That means dictator. Putin, too, is essentially a dictator, having skirted around constitutional limits by ruling Russia as either president or prime minister for 2 decades. Does Tim Ryan really think that the president shouldn't meet with the leaders of Russia, China, or Saudi Arabia? Like the other small centrist candidates, Ryan went after Bernie Sanders, but it didn't work out so well. The idea here was that offering immigrants free healthcare will exacerbate immigration issues. Tim Ryan's agreement with the premise was less than passionate.
Are Senator Sanders' proposals going to incentivize undocumented immigrants to come into this country illegally?
Yes. And right now, if you want to come into the country, you should at least ring the doorbell.
Unlike Tim Ryan in that exchange, Bernie's response felt impassioned and righteous.
I happen to believe that when I talk about health care as a human right, that applies to all people in this country. And under a Medicare for all single-payer system, we could afford to do that.
But an even bigger moment for Tim Ryan was another exchange he had with Bernie Sanders after Sanders was responding to a pretty slanted question from Jake Tapper.
If Medicare for all is enacted, there are more than 600,000 union members here in Michigan who would be forced to give up their private health care plans. Now, I understand that it would provide universal coverage, but can you guarantee those union members that the benefits under Medicare for all will be as good as the benefits that their representatives, their union reps, fought hard to negotiate?
Well, 2 things. They will be better because Medicare for all is comprehensive. It covers all health care needs. For senior citizens, it will finally include dental care, hearing aids, and eyeglasses.
But you don't know.
Second of all.
You don't know that,
Second
Bernie.
of all.
We'll come to you in a second,
I do know,
Congressman.
and I wrote the damn bill. Second of all.
That was most certainly the most memorable line from the debate. Great for Bernie, not so much for Timmy. I also thought that of all the candidates on stage, Tim Ryan had the worst closing statement.
So in a few minutes, all of the pundits are going to be...
Pundents? Glasshouse, I mispronounce words too now and then, but that's kind of funny.
All of the pundits are going to be looking at this debate and saying, well, who captured the left lane and who captured the center lane and who captured the moderate lane? I hope tonight, at some level, I captured your imagination.
Okay, he sounds like Marianne Williamson or a Disney character.
Come on, man.
The only thing Tim Ryan captured was a serious case of cringe. Here's one thing I know he won't capture: the Democratic nomination. He probably did capture Eric Swalwell's torch. I expect him to drop out soon. But Tim Ryan wasn't the only candidate to end the night with a crash landing.
I'd like to ask every American to imagine that you are facing life-threatening surgery tomorrow. Would you choose a doctor who had a track record of proven success, who'd actually done the work, or someone who had just talked about it?
Okay, I get the point Hickenlooper is trying to make here. He's saying he's experienced yada yada, but did so in the worst possible way. John Hickenlooper, imagine you are facing life-threatening surgery tomorrow. It's not exactly a great campaign slogan. Anyone who watched this debate is going to walk away associating Hickenlooper with life-threatening surgery. On the positive side for the life-threatening surgeon, he started off strong with a good argument for centrists in general that they are electable in red districts.
Last year, Democrats flipped 40 Republican seats in the House, and not one of those 40 Democrats supported the policies of our frontrunners at center stage.
Perhaps Hickenlooper's most memorable moment was his throw up your hands exchange with Bernie. Unfortunately, it may have been life-threatening surgery for his campaign.
Governor Hickenlooper, you ran a Facebook ad that warned, quote, socialism is not the answer. The ad also said, quote, don't let extremes give Trump 4 more years. Are you saying that Senator Sanders is too extreme to beat President Trump?
I'm saying the policies of this notion that you're going to take private insurance away from 180 million Americans, or you're going to, the Green New Deal, make sure that every American is guaranteed a government job if they want. That is a disaster at the ballot box. You might as well FedEx the election to Donald Trump.
The truth is that every credible poll that I have seen has me beating Donald Trump, including including the battleground states of Michigan, where I won the Democratic primary, Wisconsin, where I won the Democratic primary, and Pennsylvania.
So, again, I think if we're going to force Americans to make these radical changes, they're not going to go along. You throw your hands up, but you haven't. Oh, I can do it.
Please don't tell me that in a 4-year period we cannot go from 65 down to 55 to 45 to 35. This is not radical. This is what virtually every other country on earth does. We are.
Thank you, Senator.
I
want to bring.
Elizabeth Warren also operated on Hickenlooper, pointing out that he was taking up Republican talking points to criticize the Green New Deal.
I put a real policy on the table to create 1.2 million new jobs in green manufacturing, and no one wants to talk about it. What you want to do instead is find the Republican talking point of a made-up piece of some other part and say, oh, we don't really have to do anything.
Overall, it was not a great night for Hickenlooper. Perhaps the most effective minor conservative candidate of the night was John Delaney. He came out swinging against progressives from his opening statement.
We can go down the road that Senator Sanders and Senator Warren want to take us with bad policies like Medicare for all, free everything, and impossible promises that'll turn off independent voters and get Trump reelected.
That led to an extended debate between Delaney on one side and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren on the other.
And Senator Sanders, let's start with you. You support Medicare for all. Congressman Delaney just referred to it as bad policy, and previously he has called the idea political suicide that will just get President Trump reelected. What do you say to Congressman Delaney?
You're wrong. 5 minutes away from here, John, is a country. It's called Canada. They guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child as a human right. They spend half of what we spend. Health care is a human right, not a privilege. I believe that. I will fight for that.
But we don't have to go around and be the party of subtraction and telling half the country who has private health insurance that their health insurance is illegal. It's also bad policy. It'll underfund the industry. Many hospitals will close.
Tens of millions of people lose their health insurance every single year when they change jobs, when their employer changes that insurance. If you want a system which gives you freedom of choice with regard to doctor or hospital, which is a system which will not bankrupt you, the answer is to get rid of the profiteering of the drug companies and the insurance companies, move to Medicare for all.
We should deal with the tragedy of being uninsured and give everyone health care as a right. But why do we got to be the party of taking something away from people? That's what they're running on. They're running on telling half the country that your health insurance is illegal. It says it right in the bill.
All right.
Let's be clear about this. We are the Democrats. We are not about trying to take away health care from anyone. That's what the Republicans are trying to do. And we should stop using Republican talking points in order to talk with each other about how to best provide that health care. Now, these insurance companies do not have a God-given right to make $23 billion in profits and suck it out of our health care system.
Thank you, Senator. In fact, I don't think my colleagues understand the business. We have the public option, which is great. The public option is great, but it doesn't go far enough. Medicare does not cover the cost of health care. It covers 80% of the cost of health care in this country. And private insurance covers 120%. So if you start underpaying all the health care providers, you're going to create a two-tier market where wealthy people buy their health care with cash.
The hospitals will save substantial sums of money because they're not going to be spending a fortune doing billing and the other bureaucratic things that they have to do today. Second of all, maybe you did that and made money off of health care, but our job is to run a nonprofit health care system.
I felt that both sides got some strong-sounding points in. I obviously agree with Warren and Sanders on this issue, but Delaney did a decent enough job of holding his own against the two frontrunners. His argument of affordability to hospitals, I think, is deceptive, but is well articulated and probably persuasive for most conservative Democrats. I also thought Bernie's personal swipe didn't exactly land. This was an overall close but positive exchange for Delaney. Unfortunately for him, in a far shorter exchange, Elizabeth Warren delivered a body blow.
So I think Democrats win when we run on real solutions, not impossible promises. When we run on things that are workable, not fairy tale economics.
Look, I don't understand why anybody goes to all the trouble of running for president of the United States just to talk about what we really can't do and shouldn't fight for.
Applause bias or not, I think Delaney took some damage from that line. Overall, Delaney did alright, but considering he's near the bottom of the pack, that's probably not going to be enough for him to pick up the kind of support he needs. So I think this night was a swing and a narrow miss for Delaney. But Delaney, Hickenlooper, Ryan, and Bullock weren't the only centrist Democrats coming after the progressives. The moderators seemed determined to pick a fight between Warren and Sanders. Luckily for progressives, they didn't take the bait.
Senator Warren, you make it a point to say that you're a capitalist. Is that your way of convincing voters that you might be a safer choice than Senator Sanders?
No, it is my way of talking about I know how to fight and I know how to win.
Sanders and Warren worked cooperatively throughout the debate, as evidenced in part by the "oh, I'm sorry" moment from Sanders as he accidentally started talking during Warren's time.
Notice that I think he said
Senator Sanders, please let Senator Warren respond.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Honestly, I think tough questions are fair game, but it was astounding to me how many questions were given right-wing framing and were demonstrably hostile to Bernie Sanders.
And Senator Sanders, let's start with you. You support Medicare for all, which would eventually take private health insurance away from more than 150 million Americans in exchange for government-sponsored health care for everyone.
Sanders, you want to provide undocumented immigrants free health care and free college. Why won't this drive even more people to come to the U.S. illegally? Are Senator Sanders' proposals going to incentivize undocumented immigrants to come into this country illegally?
Yes.
President Trump has argued that the United States cannot continue to be the, quote, policeman of the world. You said the exact same thing on a debate stage in 2016. If voters are hearing the same message from you and President Trump on the issue of military intervention, how should they expect that you will be any different from him?
Trump is a pathological liar. I tell the truth.
Bernie eventually called Jake Tapper out for his right-wing framing on a question and received thunderous applause.
And Jake, your question is a Republican talking point. At the end of the day, and by the way,
here's yet another tough question asked of Bernie and his response.
You said this in 2013, just months after the Sandy Hook massacre, and I quote here, "If you pass the strongest gun control legislation tomorrow, I don't think it will have a profound effect on the tragedies we have seen." Do you still agree with that statement today?
I think you asked me about my record. Back in 1988, coming from a state that had no gun control, I called for the ban of the sale and distribution of assault weapons. I lost that election.
Despite tough questions from the moderators and attacks from the more conservative candidates, Warren and Sanders held their own, articulating strong progressive arguments that demonstrated why they are leaders in this primary race.
Donald Trump disgraces the office of president every single day.
Tonight, as we speak, right now, 500,000 Americans are sleeping out on the street, and yet companies like Amazon that made billions in profits did not pay one nickel in federal income tax.
The basic profit model of an insurance company is taking as much money as you can in premiums and pay out as little as possible in health care coverage.
People talk about having insurance. There are millions of people who have insurance. They can't go to the doctor, and when they come out of the hospital, they go bankrupt.
We can't choose a candidate we don't believe in just because we're too scared to do anything else. And we can't ask other people to vote for a candidate we don't believe in.
I get a little bit tired of Democrats afraid of big ideas. Republicans are not afraid of big ideas. They could give $1 trillion in tax breaks to billionaires and profitable corporations.
We're not going to solve the urgent problems that we face with small ideas and spinelessness.
They could bail out the crooks on Wall Street.
We're going to solve them by being the Democratic Party of big structural change.
So please don't tell me that we cannot take on the fossil fuel industry and nothing happens unless we do that.
This was a great night for progressives. Sanders, Warren, and Williamson all came out on top as winners. It was also a strong night for Pete. I think Tim Ryan took the biggest L. which after getting dunked on by Tulsi Gabbard in debate 1, should mean he's about ready to drop out of the race. Honestly, can anyone tell me why this guy is still running?
Yes, America is great.
So, those are my opinions on this debate, but I value yours, so let's continue the conversation. Let me know in the comments section, what do you think? Who won?